Welcome to your intro into rock climbing. So let's dive into some of this material here. To start, we have two types of rock climbing. The first is going to be free climbing, and the second is going to be aid climbing. In recent history, since Alex Arnold climbed El Cap and Half Dome without a rope and protection, we started to think about free climbing as being free soloing, when that is in fact different. Free climbing is the act of climbing without any sort of aid. So using your hands and feet and body movement to ascend the rock wall. But that doesn't mean that you don't still have protection of some sort, okay? And protection is what we place on the rock or the anchors that we build in order to keep us from falling if we aren't able to continue up the rock. Aid climbing, however, is something that's used a lot of time in big wall climbing, multi-pitch climbing, that helps you ascend through difficult climbs without a physical ability to do that in a free climbing way. So for example, you'll see this gentleman right here is aid climbing. Oh, this picture didn't come through properly, but this person is climbing by the use of their hands, and feet, but they still have a rope and what we call protection, right, and gear. Versus this person is able to ascend the rock without climbing the rock the entire time. This is usually used to help people through challenging sections of a climb, and they will do part of the climb free and part of the climb aided. So I found this really neat diagram here that shows the difference. So aid climbing, you'll see, is having this ladder here that this person is using to ascend up the wall. Okay, free climbing, there's still a rope, protection, the person's using their own hands and feet and body strength, versus free soloing, and knowing the difference between that, in that this person is climbing without any sort of protection. The other two types of climbing is going to be top roping versus lead climbing. Okay, so let's start with top roping. Top roping is when we have something called an anchor. Okay, an anchor up here that is placed at the top of the rock that allows the climber to ascend up the rock, always having the rope taut through the anchor. So if the climber ever falls, they don't fall more than a couple of inches. Okay, they're also just climbing, and they're not placing any sort of protection because the anchor itself is the protection. Lead climbing, however, is when someone ascends up the rock by placing protection. This diagram is calling it an anchor, but by placing protection as many anchors until the climber can get to the top of the climb. Lead climbing requires a special skill set and practice, because how you place protection, how you build these many anchors, how you move around the rock means that if you fall, you need to be able to prevent anything from happening to that protection so you don't continue to fall. So that being said, if this person is ever to fall, they're going to fall as far down as double the length of wherever their last protection is placed. Okay, so when this person, top roper, falls, they fall a couple of inches because it's taut the whole time, versus this person, if they were to fall, they would fall here and they would come down twice as far as their last protection. So what are some ways that we can climb? So there's indoor rock climbing, which in our area is metal mark, where all of this is fake rock that is placed up, and we create something called routes. Okay, and with these routes, as they're placed up, they are graded, and we'll get into graded later. But this allows for top roping or lead climbing. You'll notice that this person is top roping here in the upper corner on the left side of the picture, because the rope is taut and all the way up, versus this woman here in the bottom right is lead climbing. This is her belayer, who she's placing protection as she goes. So there's different grades, different challenges, and the climbs themselves will change throughout the month or every other month as route setters in the gym are changing. The the advantage is that this is accessible at any time. It's in the middle of the city or in the middle of an area, and so someone doesn't have to commute or have a special set of gear, and allows for people to get in and practice their skills without having the commitment to driving and hiking and that outdoor knowledge. Another example is bouldering, which can also be found in climbing gyms, okay? But bouldering is where you are free solo climbing, meaning you don't have any protection, but you're free climbing and that you're using your body to ascend up the rock. We call them problems when you're bouldering, which is a specific route that you're trying to ascend. And you only climb as far as you're willing to fall. It requires the least amount of gear, just some climbing shoes, the clothes that you're wearing, and what we call a crash pad, which you'll notice on the ground. You typically have someone here who's spotting and take turns trying to solve this bouldering problem. Now, there is extreme bouldering where people boulder a lot higher than would be safe to fall, but for the most part, this is the type of bouldering that you'll see. Top roping, already talked about that a little bit, but outdoor top roping. So someone might have to lead climb up to build the anchor so someone else can top rope. But sometimes you can you can hike up to the top, set up your anchor, and toss the rope down. So different options, but again, nice introduction into climbing where the risk isn't as high. So there's an anchor, there's definitely a rope. Each person, this person down here, the belayer, which we'll get into later in this class and what that skill set is, the belayer versus the climber, and each person has to have a harness, a special set of shoes, and a helmet, okay? We'll get into all the gear in our next lecture. Types of climbing. Sport. So sport climbing is where you're lead climbing, so you're placing your protection as you go. But this protection, all you need are these little items right here called quick draws, which I will explain in, like I said, our gear conversation or our gear lecture. And with this, these are all drilled into the rock, and so the route is predetermined by someone else. And then you clip in these protection as you go, and clip your rope in, so again you'd fall twice as far as wherever your last protection is. This is usually the next intro after top roping if people continue it with climbing. Now this is this is called traditional climbing and is usually heard of as trad climbing, so trad for traditional, and it's where there is no bolts and you leave very little impact on the rock, and it's like you were never there, and it's the most natural way of climbing because you're not impacting the natural environment. So you're placing protection as you climb up in cracks in the rock or features of the rock that allows you to build these little mini anchors and place protection as you go. So these are anywhere from quick draws to what we call cams to what we call nuts, okay? So all these different things, and like I said, I'll get into more of the detail of that and show videos of how all of this stuff works, but this is the most complicated, if you will, style of climbing. It takes a lot of planning to make sure that you have the proper amount of gear, that you can place that gear properly, and it's definitely the most expensive because all that gear adds up. So most people don't start off with this, but work their way up to trad climbing. So really quick, I wanted to show you this one more time. So now that you've had a little bit more information, but this is aid climbing, right? You have the ladders, the gear, and you're able to ascend up a challenging part of the rock. Free climbing is using your body, your hands and feet. And then free soloing, which none of you should be doing, okay, is where you don't have any sort of rope or anything. Now, like I said, technically bouldering, when we talked about that, is a free soloing act. Some of you that might be interested in outdoor activities, you'll also hear blue free soloing, big water free soloing, where you climb as far as you can, but if you fall into the ocean, and so you don't have any sort of protection, but you don't fall to harm. Now, sometimes when we get up to the top of a climb, we have to descend after we get up to the top. So sometimes we can hike off the top. If you're top roping, your belayer will bring you down. But if you don't do that, if you don't have access to that, and you need to get back to the ground because you can't hike out, you need to rappel. So this is how you actually descend a climb afterwards. So this is typically a skill learned once you start lead climbing in a sport route, because once you get up to the top, you need to get back down to your climber if you're not doing a multi-pitch route. Okay, so really, it's actually rappelling is actually a lot of fun. So there are different versions. So that kind of mentioned some of them, like blue free soloing, things like that. But there's also mountaineering, which is alpine climbing. So you'll notice I picked these pictures because these people are using rock climbing skills, but in different sorts of terrain. So they're using a whole new alpine skill set. You'll notice once you get into this type of gear that some of the gear overlaps, but some of it is a lot more lightweight. You make it as you go. You don't place as much protection while you're climbing because there's only certain sections that you don't feel comfortable on, or whatever the case may be. But alpine climbing is kind of that superior climbing that requires a lot more of a skill set, lots of years of practice and guiding, things like that. Another option is multi-pitch. Like I said, I talked about that a little bit with aid climbing, but that's where you're using a lot of different skill sets that takes many years to practice. So this really neat diagram breaks things down for you. So you have the difference of aid climbing versus free climbing. So aid climbing is going to have the ladders, and you're not going to use just your body strength. Free climbing, you're going to use just your hands and feet and body strength and skill set. So that's going to be either roped or unroped. And if you're unroped, that's either free soloing or bouldering. Okay. If you're roped, you're either going to be lead climbing or top roping. And then if this had continued, as you can see, I just took a snippet of it of what we talked about, but under lead climbing, that would become traditional or sport climbing. Climbing lengths and grades. When we talk about climbing lengths, we talk about pitch length. And so pitch is however far you can climb with one length of rope. Now that's definitely going to vary, okay? And so sometimes a pitch is 30 feet, sometimes a pitch is 45 feet, 50 feet, depending on your length of rope, 100 feet even, if you're not going all the way up and back down and you're climbing up and having your partner come and meet you up there and continue up a wall. So a single pitch is what we would do in this class, where we climb up to the top or to our anchor and come back down. A multi-pitch is going to be where I climb up 70 feet and my partner comes and meets me at that level. I climb up another 50 feet and my partner comes up and meet me at that level. And we continue to ascend the rock until we finally make it to the top. So a multi-pitch is going to be anything that's 20 pitches or less, and a big wall climb like El Capitan or Half Dome is going to be a big wall, so it's going to be 20 pitches or more. Okay, so each of these represents a pitch. So this is a rating of 5.7. You'd go from here to here. This is a rating of 5.6 from here to here. And what I would do is I would climb up this pitch, set up an anchor, and then my partner would climb up behind me and I would belay them, and that person would clean up all the gear that I used, and we would just do that the entire trip up. I go up, they follow. They go up, I follow. Back and forth, back and forth. You'll notice it gives a grade 5.8, 5.7, and it also says how long it is, 60 meters, okay? And it gives us this information as we go. So big wall, multi-pitch,